They left Vaela Voss at the Moon Ferry with no lantern, no crossing right, and the cursed river rising behind her. The pack had gathered at Silver Reed Crossing to watch the sentence carried out. That was how Alpha King Cadran Holt's court preferred punishment. Public enough to satisfy anger, clean enough to avoid calling itself cruelty. The riverbank was full of wolf banners, iron lanterns, wet silver reeds, and faces that had once asked Vaela for help in whispers. Mothers who had begged her to ferry fevered sons before sunrise. Old soldiers who had pressed blood-soaked claws against their ribs while she rode through fog. Young guards who had looked away when official gates closed and Mercy needed a smaller boat. Tonight, none of them spoke for her. The Moon Ferry waited at the black dock, glowing faintly beneath the mist. It was not large. That was the strange thing. For all the fear woven around it, the ferry looked almost humble. Pale wooden ribs, a curved prow carved with a sleeping wolf, and silver rope coiled at its bow like moonlight made solid. But every wolf in the kingdom knew the law of that boat. It crossed the cursed river only when passage was lawful. It ignored bribes. It ignored tears. It ignored royal impatience when the river itself refused the crossing. Or so the court claimed. Vaela knew the ferry better than the court did. She knew how its boards sighed before fog thickened. She knew which reed clusters hid the shallow pool beneath the eastern current. She knew the old knot under the left oarlock that warmed when someone aboard was more wounded than guilty. She had spent years helping others cross safely, not because the crown ordered it, but because official guards often found rules more convenient than mercy. Now the same people called her traitor. Ferry-Master Lysa Thorn stood beside the dock marker in her blue-gray crossing cloak, one hand resting on the silver ledger chained to her waist. Her face was composed, sharp, beautiful in the severe way of women who knew law could make cruelty look dignified. Every unrecorded mercy crossing weakened her ledger. Every life Vaela ferried without permission proved the official gate had failed someone first. Vaela Voss, she announced. Your crossing right is revoked for unlawful moonless passage, curfew breach, and suspected aid to enemy wolves. The words rolled over the river like stones. Vaela stood with her wrists unbound. That was deliberate. Bound hands would have made her look like a prisoner. Free hands made it look as if she deserved abandonment because she could still stand. She wore a plain dark dress, hem soaked from the mud, her hair braided tightly down her back. Mist clung to her cheeks and lashes. She kept her chin level, though the river behind her breathed cold against her spine. Cadran Holt stood at the head of the gathered pack, tall, broad-shouldered, black-haired, Alpha King of the Holt wolves, with a winter-gray gaze and a fur-lined black mantle that moved in the river wind like a shadow with teeth. His wolf was famous for never hesitating at battle lines. His judgments were said to be clean. He had read Lysa's ferry ledger at dawn. He had seen 3 moonless crossings marked unlawful. He had not asked why the same nights held missing healer calls and closed guard gates. That was the part that hurt. Clean judgments were easiest to trust from a distance. Vaela Voss, he said, voice carrying over the reeds. Did you break curfew and take the Moon Ferry across the river on 3 moonless nights? Yes, the pack murmured. Lysa's mouth softened with victory. Cadran's gaze hardened. Did you record those crossings in the ferry ledger? No. A louder sound moved through the crowd now. Vaela felt each face turn colder, as if silence had not already taught them betrayal. Cadran stepped closer. Did you carry wolves from the far bank without royal guard approval? Vaela looked at him. There were answers that might save her body but destroy the people she had carried. Names of wounded pack members hidden beneath blankets. Names of children with river fever whose mothers had been told the official ferry hour had passed. Names of men loyal to Cadran who had crawled through reeds because the watchtowers mistook their blood for enemy scent. If she named them now, the court would not honor mercy. It would punish desperation. Yes, she said. Lysa lifted the silver ledger. The Ferry-Master's record shows no approved mercy crossings, only hidden movement under moonless fog. Enemy scouts were seen moving through the far reeds the same nights. Vaela turned toward her. Your ledger shows what you chose to write. Lysa's eyes cooled. And your silence shows what you chose to hide. Cadran watched Vaela carefully. Not softly, not with trust, but something in him paused at that sentence. Too late. Why? He asked. One word. Vaela almost laughed. Not from amusement, from the cruelty of being asked for truth only after the verdict had already found its shape. Would you have listened before tonight? She asked. His jaw tightened. Answer. There it was. The Alpha King, not the man. Vaela looked past him to the pack, to the mothers who would not meet her eyes, to the guards who knew which blankets had been wet with blood, to the old soldier leaning on a cane she had helped him keep by rowing him to the healer across the cursed bend. No, she said. Cadran's expression closed. Lysa stepped beside him. Mercy cannot exist outside crossing law. If every lonely woman with an oar decides who may pass, the cursed river becomes a door for enemies. Lonely woman. That one landed. Vaela had no mate, no public family in court, no powerful name to stand behind her. She had hands that knew ropes, eyes that read fog, and a memory full of people who had survived because she chose the river over permission. The pack accepted Lysa's phrasing too easily. Cadran lifted one hand. The Moon Ferry's silver rope stirred. Vaela's breath caught despite herself. He was not sentencing her to death. Not officially. Silver Reed crossing law was more elegant than that. A person stripped of crossing right could remain on the wrong bank until the ferry accepted them again. Sometimes that took a day, sometimes a season, sometimes never. Your crossing right is revoked, Cadran said. You will remain at the eastern bank until the Moon Ferry accepts your passage lawfully. The ferry drifted closer to the dock. Lysa smiled faintly. Vaela understood the performance now. They would put her across. Leave her there. Let the river judge what the court did not want to name. Cadran looked at her one last time. If you served mercy, the ferry will know. Vaela's voice stayed steady. And if you mistake abandonment for justice? His eyes flickered. Only once. The guards moved. Vaela stepped onto the Moon Ferry without being touched. She would not let them drag her onto the boat she had kept alive through flood seasons and winter rot. The boards warmed under her feet. Barely. Enough to make her heart ache. The ferry crossed in silence. Mist swallowed the pack behind her. The cursed river whispered against the hull, full of old bones and moonlit reeds. When the boat reached the eastern bank, Vaela stepped off onto black mud and turned back. The ferry should have waited for the king's command. It did not. Its silver rope uncoiled from the post by itself. For one breath, Vaela thought it might stay with her. Then the Moon Ferry drifted away, returning to the western bank and leaving her alone beneath the reeds. Across the river, the pack watched. Cadran stood still beside Lysa. Vaela did not call out. She did not plead. She stood on the wrong shore with no lantern, no crossing right, and the rising river behind her. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the ferry's pale boards, a single silver bell rang once. Not for departure, for witness. The Moon Ferry did not pardon. It recorded crossings the ledger had refused to carry. Across the river, Lysa Thorn's silver ledger snapped open against her waist. The pages did not turn toward the king. They turned toward the wrong shore. Cadran's hand lowered slowly. For the first time, command had nothing to hold. Lysa's fairy ledger opened before she could hold it shut. The silver book snapped against the chain at her waist, hard enough to make the ferrymaster stumble one step back from the dock marker. Its pages whipped in the mist, not toward Cadran Holt, not toward the royal guards, not toward the gathered pack who had watched Vaela Voss be carried to the wrong shore. They turned toward the eastern bank, toward Vaela. Across the cursed river, Vaela stood in black mud, with the reeds rising behind her and no lantern in her hand. The water had climbed higher since the ferry left her there. It breathed against the bank in slow, hungry pulls, touching the hem of her dress, then withdrawing as if testing how long she would remain. She did not step back. That was the first thing Cadran noticed. Not the bell, not the ledger, not even Lysa's sudden pallor. Vaela did not retreat from the river. She stood where he had left her and watched the book open. The silver bell beneath the ferry boards rang once more, softer this time. Lysa clamped one hand over the ledger. "A crossing irregularity," she said quickly. "Nothing more." No one answered. The Moon Ferry rocked at the western dock, empty and pale. Its silver rope hung loose in the mist, no longer answering Cadran's lifted hand. The ferry did not drift toward Vaela. It did not return her. It did not undo his sentence. The Moon Ferry did not pardon. It recorded crossings the ledger had refused to carry. Cadran's eyes moved to the open book at Lysa's waist. "Read it." Lysa's mouth tightened. "Majesty, ferry ledgers respond to river disturbance. A witness bell can mark fog pressure, blood scent, unlawful weight, or procedural imbalance. Read it. It is not proof." "I did not say it was." His voice lowered. "What crossing did the ledger refuse?" That question changed the bank. Not enough to heal anything. Enough for several faces to shift. Vaela heard it across the river. The bell carried his voice strangely, thinning distance without softening meaning. She almost hated that the right question had finally come from him. Almost. But late truth still arrived, standing on the back of harm. Lysa looked down. The ledger pages were blank where she could see them. Then the silver ink turned. Not toward her. Toward the eastern bank. A line appeared across the open pages, visible from the wrong shore as if moonlight itself had chosen an angle. Third moonless crossing refused by Ferry-Master record. A murmur moved through the pack. Lysa shut the book halfway. It opened again. Harder. "The record is incomplete," she snapped. "A refused record does not mean a lawful passage. Mercy outside ledger becomes enemy passage. That is why crossing law exists." Vaela's voice came from across the water. Not loud, clear. "Crossing law separates rescue from treason." The pack turned toward her. Cadran did too. Mist moved around Vaela's shoulders. The river rose behind her, silver black in the dark. But she kept her feet planted in the mud. She looked smaller across the water, and somehow more difficult to move. Lysa laughed once. "You hid 3 crossings and speak of law? I hid names from people who would punish the wounded for surviving after curfew. Convenient." "No," Vaela said. "Costly." The old soldier with the cane lowered his head. Cadran saw it. So did Lysa. She turned sharply toward the crowd. "Do not be swayed. The accused admits she carried bodies under moonless fog. Enemy scouts crossed those same nights." Vaela's face did not change. "Then ask which side of the ferry held wounds." Lysa's fingers tightened around the ledger chain. Cadran looked at Vaela across the river. "Who was carried?" There it was again. The question that could save her and ruin someone else. Vaela's jaw tightened. "If I give you names, will you punish them for needing the crossing?" Cadran did not answer quickly. That was answer enough. Vaela's eyes cooled. Then I will not do your courage for you. The sentence struck him cleanly. He deserved it. Still, his gaze returned to the ledger. The ferry can show one record. Lysa stepped in. Majesty. Allowing the ferry to select records undermines the ferry-master's authority. The ferry is not selecting, Vaela said. It is carrying what your ledger refused. The bell rang again. The ledger pages turned with a sound like wet leaves. Images rose in the silver surface. Not faces yet, not full truth, only fragments. Moonless fog. A blanket dark with fever sweat. Vaela's hands on the ferry rope. A low groan from someone hidden on the boards. Closed official gates behind her. Guard lanterns extinguished along the western post. Cadran watched the memory sharpen. A mark appeared on the fever blanket. Black wolf and broken spear. His royal guard sigil. The captain beside him went rigid. Lysa snapped. Many have stolen royal cloth. Vaela looked toward the captain. Was one of your men missing from roll call after the second flood moon? The captain's mouth opened. Closed? Cadran turned to him. Answer. The captain swallowed. Yes, Majesty. Lysa said, missing does not mean carried lawfully. Vaela's voice stayed even. He was left at the far reeds with river fever because the official crossing closed early. The crossing closed because enemy scent was reported. Lysa fired back. The crossing closed because the ferrymaster ordered the gate barred before the healer bell finished ringing. The ledger flashed. A second image appeared. The ferry gate closed, Lysa's blue-gray cloak visible at the post, her hand over the ledger while someone pounded from the far side. The pack went silent. Not gasp. Not outrage. Silence with memory inside it. Cadran looked at Lysa. She did not confess. She did not break. She raised her chin. Even if a royal guard was ill, secret passage creates the same danger. Once mercy leaves record, enemies can wear its cloak. Vaela nodded once. That surprised him. Then she said, yes. That is why rescue crossing must be recorded separately from trade crossing, patrol crossing, and enemy seizure. That is ferry law older than your ledger. Lysa's eyes sharpened. You quote law now? I wrote it while you wore it. The Moon Ferry shifted against the dock. Its pale boards groaned. The ledger opened fully. This time, the ink did not show a memory. It wrote a line. Cadran stepped closer to read, but the pages turned again toward Vaela's shore, forcing him to look across the river instead of down at the book. Silver letters burned bright in the mist. Royal Guard carried under fever blanket. The captain of the Royal Guard stopped looking at Vaela. That was how Cadran knew the line in the ledger had struck a living place. The silver words still burned across the open pages at Lysa Thorn's waist, bright enough to cut through the fog rolling over Silver Reed Crossing. The Moon Ferry rocked against the western dock, empty and pale, while across the cursed river Vaela stood ankle-deep in black mud with the water rising behind her. No lantern, no crossing right, no one beside her, and still the record had turned toward her shore. Cadran did not look away from his captain. Name him. The captain's throat moved. Majesty. Name the guard carried under the fever blanket. Lysa stepped in before the captain answered. Royal Guard identities are not to be exposed at riverbank trials. Vaela's voice came clear across the water. They were not too sacred to be left in reeds. The captain flinched. Cadran saw it. So did the pack. The Alpha King turned fully toward him. Name him. The captain lowered his head. Derek Holtgard. The name moved through the gathered wolves with the force of an old wound reopened. Derek Holtgard had been one of Cadran's river scouts. Loyal, quiet. A man who knew the cursed river's bends better than half the royal patrols. 3 months ago, he had vanished during flood watch and returned 2 days later, pale, fever-burned, and unable to explain where he had been without collapsing into shaking silence. Cadran remembered standing beside his sickbed. He remembered the healers saying river fever had eaten his memory. He remembered Lysa's ledger listing the night as clean. No crossing, no emergency call, no ferry movement. Clean judgments were easiest to trust from a distance. Now the distance was gone. "Where is Derek?" Cadran asked. "At the North Watch Post," the captain said. "Still recovering." "Send for him." Lysa's fingers tightened around the ledger chain. "Majesty, this is becoming disorder. A fevered guard's confusion cannot overturn crossing law." "No one is overturning crossing law," Vaela said. "We are asking why your record refused to carry it." Lysa turned toward the river, her face smooth again. "Because mercy without record is how enemies learn our gates. That is what you still refuse to understand. A traitor does not arrive wearing a traitor's face. She arrives with a blanket, a sobbing mother, a bleeding soldier, a story urgent enough to make law feel cruel." Vaela was silent for a breath. Mist curled around her like pale fingers. Then she said, "Law was already cruel when the gate closed before the healer bell finished ringing." The Moon Ferry's silver bell answered softly. One note. The ledger pages shifted. Lysa slammed her palm against them, but the pages did not close. Silver ink crawled across the margin and formed a narrow image, a bell rope swinging in the western watch arch, a healer lantern burning green, and Lysa's blue-gray sleeve moving across the gate bar. The pack leaned in. Lysa spoke sharply. "A visual fragment is not motive." "No," Vaela said. "It is memory." Cadran looked at the image. "Why was the gate barred?" Lysa lifted her chin. "Enemy scent was reported." Vaela's eyes hardened across the river. "By whom?" "Betrayal." "Which patrol?" Lysa did not answer quickly enough. Cadran noticed. His wolf noticed too. The air around him changed, not into rage yet, but into the kind of cold pressure that made guards stand straighter and liars count exits. Lysa recovered. Patrol markings were lost in river fog. Vaela gave a faint, tired smile. "Of course." The words carried no humor. Cadran turned toward the ledger. "Show the patrol mark." The ledger did not move. Lysa seized the silence. "You see? The ferry shows only what the accused has stirred. It cannot build a complete record from broken moonlight." Vaela stepped backward as the river pushed higher against the bank. Only one step. The reeds behind her bent under the rising current. Cadran's gaze snapped to the water. "The river is climbing." "It does that to people without crossing." "Right," Lysa said. "The river tests them." Vaela looked at her. "No, it counts how long the court takes to name what it already knows." The ferry bell rang again. This time the boat itself moved. Not across the river, only a few feet from the western dock, as if straining against an invisible question. Its silver rope slid over wet wood. The carved sleeping wolf at its prow turned slightly toward Vaela's shore. The pack murmured. Lysa raised her voice. "The ferry must remain docked until the Alpha King commands passage." "The ferry is not asking for passage," Vaela said. "It is asking for record." Cadran looked at her through the fog. "What record?" She did not soften at his question. Good. She had no reason to. The difference between rescue crossing and trader crossing. Lysa laughed. "A charming invention." "Older than your ledger," Vaela said. "Rescue crossing is taken when a life is in immediate danger and official passage is denied. It must be witnessed by river sign, healer mark, or ferry bell. Trader crossing is hidden for profit, enemy movement, or false gatekeeping." Lysa's smile sharpened. And you decided which was which? No, Vaela said. The ferry did. I only rowed when it warmed. The old knot under the left oarlock glowed. Cadran had not noticed that knot before. Now it shone faintly, silver beneath the mist. The ledger opened wider, and another image rose. Vaela kneeling in the ferry, one hand on the glowing oarlock, the other pulling a fever blanket back from a man's face. Derek Holtgard, younger, sweating, lips blue, a royal guard sigil visible at his throat. Behind Vaela, the official gate stood barred. Beyond it, a green healer lantern swung unanswered. The image lasted only a heartbeat. Enough. Cadran's face changed. Not into apology, into recognition he could no longer command away. Lysa spoke before the silence settled. Even if this crossing saved a guard, it proves she had unlawful access. One mercy crossing becomes three. Three becomes habit. Habit becomes a road enemies can buy. Vaela looked at Lysa then. Not at Cadran, at Lysa. Enemies did buy a road, she said, but not from me. The ferrymaster went very still. The Moon Ferry bell rang for the third time. The ledger pages shook violently, as if something beneath the silver binding had begun to fight the chain. Cadran stepped toward Lysa. What does she mean? Lysa's face remained composed, but her hand covered the lower page. Too late. A new line forced itself beneath the first. Healer bell denied by Ferry-Master order. Then the silver ink darkened. A second line began to form under it. Enemy passage recorded as. Lysa closed the ledger with both hands. The sound cracked across Silver Reed Crossing harder than the river bell. For one moment, everyone stared at her fingers, pressed white against the silver cover, as if authority could still be restored by force. The Moon Ferry rocked beside the western dock. Its pale boards glowed faintly beneath the mist, and the old knot under the left oarlock remained lit like an eye that had opened and refused sleep. Across the cursed river, Vaela stood very still. The water had reached her ankles now, black, silver-laced, and cold. Cadran looked at the closed ledger. Open it. Lysa's breathing stayed controlled. Majesty, the book is reacting to contamination. The accused is standing on the wrong shore. Her crossing, right, is severed. The river is trying to drag irregular passage out of any record nearby. Vaela's voice came over the water. The river is not dragging. Your ledger is choking. Lysa's eyes flashed. A woman stripped of crossing, right, does not interpret fairy law. No, Vaela said. She remembers what the ferrymaster chose not to teach. A few guards shifted uneasily. That mattered, not because they trusted Vaela, because some of them had once crossed in her boat and were beginning to wonder what else the official ledger had left behind. Cadran stepped closer to Lysa. Open it. The command did not roar. That made it worse. Lysa lowered her hands slowly. The ledger sprang open at once. Silver pages turned so fast the mist around them spun. The unfinished line from before darkened, then stretched across both pages. The ferry bell rang once beneath the boards, not loud but deep enough to make the river pause against Vaela's feet. Enemy passage recorded as Royal Patrol. No one spoke. The captain of the guard went rigid. Cadran's face did not change, but the air around him tightened until the reeds nearest the dock bent away from him. Which patrol? He asked. Lysa answered too quickly. Forgery. Vaela looked at her. That is not a patrol name. Lysa turned sharply toward her. And you would know? From your secret crossings? Your moonless routes? Your hidden passengers? Vaela did not rise to the hook. I would know because rescue crossings leave river witness. Patrol crossings leave command witness. They do not smell the same to the ferry. The ledger shuddered. Cadran looked toward her. Explain. She hated that word from him. Explain. As if her knowledge had not already been standing in the mud all night. Still, the fairy had opened one record. If she refused every answer now, Lysa would seal the space with fear. Royal Patrol crossings carry order weight, Vaela said. A command mark. Guard count, weapon count. Ferry-Master approval. Rescue crossings carry need weight. Fever, blood, healer bell, flood breach, child distress. The Moon Ferry does not care about titles. It remembers why the crossing was taken. Lysa laughed softly. A convenient belief from a woman who took the ferry without record. Vaela looked at the glowing oarlock. No, a law older than your ledger. The Moon Ferry groaned. The silver pages turned again. A dim image rose from the ledger. The western dock under moonless fog, not the night Vaela had carried Derek Holtgard, but another night. Two figures in Royal Patrol cloaks stood beside the ferry. Their faces were blurred by river mist. Their shoulders were too still, their hands too clean, their boots wrong for Holt soldiers. No mud from the western road, no guard bind at the wrist, no scent chains visible at the throat. Yet the ledger had accepted them. A silver command mark burned above their heads. Then the image shifted. Lysa's hand appeared, pressing the mark into the page. The pack drew one breath together. Lysa snapped. Partial memory, river distortion. The accused has stirred the ferry against me. Vaela almost laughed. The cursed river rose higher around her feet. If I could stir the ferry against you, she said, I would not be standing here without a lantern. The line landed. Even Cadran looked away for a heartbeat. Not in shame fully. In recognition he did not yet deserve to call shame. The river behind Vaela hissed through the reeds. A cold current curled around her calves. She shifted her stance carefully, not retreating, only keeping balance. The wrong shore was not passive punishment. It was alive. The longer a stripped soul remained there, the more the river tested the shape of their right to stand. Cadran saw the water climb. How long can she remain there? Lysa answered before Vaela could. Until the ferry accepts lawful return. And if it does not, the river decides. The words were too clean. Cadran turned to her. That is not an answer. It is crossing law. Vaela's voice cut across the water. No, it is abandonment with a prettier title. The Moon Ferry bell rang once. Lysa's face hardened. You keep turning mercy into accusation. Enemy scouts crossed the same week you hid your passengers. That remains fact. The ledger page brightened. Vaela looked down the river, where fog gathered thick between black reeds. Then let the ferry show who paid for enemy passage. Lysa went still, only for a breath, but Cadran saw it now. He saw too late, but he saw. The ledger pages turned again, then stopped at a blank spread. Silver ink trembled at the top, trying to form a line. Lysa's hand hovered near the chain at her waist, but did not touch the pages this time. Cadran's gaze sharpened. Let it write! The ink formed 3 words. Coin accepted by. Then the page flooded black. Not ink. River water. It poured upward from the ledger, as if the cursed river had found a throat inside the book. Lysa gasped and jerked back. The silver pages writhed. The Moon Ferry pulled at its rope, straining from the dock. Vaela felt the river rise behind her knees. Something had sealed that record more deeply than omission. She looked at the ferry. The ferry rocked toward her shore, then stopped, waiting. Cadran followed her gaze. What does it need? Vaela did not soften because he had asked the right question. It needs the ferry, Master's key. Lysa's hand closed over the iron key at her throat. The river behind Vaela climbed another inch, and the ledger wrote through the black water, sealed under Ferry-Master authority. The iron key at Lysa Thorn's throat began to frost. Not with winter, with river cold. Silver mist gathered along its teeth, wrapping the little black metal shape in pale breath until every eye on the western bank turned toward it. Lysa kept her hand closed around the key, knuckles white, as if pressure could make old fairy law forget who had used it last. Across the cursed river, Vaela watched the water climb to her knees. It had begun pulling harder now, not sweeping her away, not yet, but testing the mud beneath her feet. The reeds behind her bent and hissed. The wrong shore did not wait politely while men argued over proof. Cadran saw the river rise. His jaw tightened. "Use the key," he said. Lysa's face stayed composed. "Majesty, the key seals protected crossings. Opening a sealed ferry record before the full crossing council is a breach of office." Vaela's voice came over the water. "So was sealing enemy passage under royal patrol." Lysa turned toward her. "You do not know what was sealed. The ferry knows. The ferry reacts to disturbance. The ferry records what your ledger refused to carry." The silver bell under the boards rang once. Cadran looked at the Moon Ferry. It floated beside the dock, quiet and pale, its rope slack over the wet post. Nothing about it bowed to him now. That unsettled the pack more than open defiance would have. A person could be threatened. A boat that had carried the dead across a cursed river for generations could only be answered. He turned back to Lysa. "Open the record." "Majesty." That was not a request. For a moment, the ferrymaster looked at him as if she had expected his doubt to protect her longer. Then she drew the key from her throat. The chain scraped softly against her collarbone. The ledger opened wider. Black river water still covered the lower page, but the surface of it stilled when the key came near. Lysa placed the iron teeth against the silver binding. She did not turn it. Cadran's voice lowered. "Now." She turned the key. The ledger screamed. Not loudly. Worse. A thin sound, like wet wood splitting under moonlight. The river water on the page pulled backward into the binding, revealing silver lines beneath. The unfinished phrase returned first. "Coin accepted by," then the letters changed. "Not completed. Corrected. Coin accepted under Ferry-Master key." The bank went silent. Lysa's hand flew from the ledger as if the book had burned her. "That does not name me," Vaela answered at once. "No, it names your office. And I am not the only one who can touch a key. You are the only one who wears that one." The pack looked at the black key still hanging from Lysa's chain. Cadran did too. Lysa lifted her chin. Keys can be copied. The Moon Ferry rocked hard against the dock. The old oarlock glowed again. Vaela looked at it, and something in her chest twisted. She knew that glow. It came when the ferry had more memory than the ledger could bear, but not enough open law to speak safely. "Ask for the coin," she said. Cadran turned toward her. "What?" "Ferry records do not remember only passage. They remember payment when payment changes the crossing's nature." Her gaze stayed on the ledger, not him. Rescue leaves witness. Patrol leaves command. Enemy passage leaves price. Lysa laughed sharply. "She invents law from fog." Vaela did not look at her. "Then the ferry should stay silent." The ferry did not. The ledger page darkened, then rose into an image, a gloved hand placing 3 black coins on the ferry post under moonless mist. Not silver, not crown. Minted iron. Black river coins, the kind used by raiders who did not want their scent tracked by market metal. A sleeve entered the image. Blue-gray. The same shade as Lysa's crossing cloak. Lysa said, "Many ferry workers wear blue-gray." Vaela's mouth hardened. "Only one of them bars healer gates while enemy coin warms the post." The image shifted. A second hand pressed the Ferry-Master key into the ledger margin. The enemy crossing mark changed shape, smoothing into the Royal Patrol symbol that had fooled the record. Cadran's eyes went cold. Lysa spoke quickly. A forged visual. River water distorts memory when the accused stands across an active curse line. You all know this. The pack wanted to believe her. Vaela could feel it even from the wrong shore. They wanted one clean villain, but not if the villain had held the official ledger for years. They wanted mercy to be suspicious, not law to be rotten. Mercy asked them to remember who they had ignored. The river tugged at Vaela's knees. She shifted her weight and nearly slipped. Cadran moved before he thought. One step toward the ferry. Vaela saw it. So did Lysa. The Ferry-Master's expression changed, quick and sharp. Majesty, if you mean to cross, I must advise against it. The ferry is unstable under witness. Cadran looked at Vaela across the river. Can it cross? Vaela did not answer quickly. He deserved no easy road toward her. The ferry can cross, she said. Whether it will bring you where you intend is another matter. Lysa seized that. You hear her? She threatens the king with the ferry. Vaela's eyes cut to her. No. I warn him you have mistaken command for passage. The Moon Ferry drifted closer to Cadran without being called. The pack stepped back. Its silver rope uncoiled from the post and slid across wet wood until it lay near his boots like an offered question. Cadran looked at it. He had commanded armies, river forts, wolf patrols, and border courts. He had lifted one hand and made hundreds obey. But the rope at his feet did not feel like obedience. It felt like challenge. He stepped onto the ferry, Lysa pale. Majesty, he did not look back. If the record needs the wrong shore, I will hear it there. Vaela's face did not soften across the water. Do not come to me as if arriving repairs leaving. The words struck him just as the ferry pulled away. Cadran stood alone on the pale boards while the Moon Ferry slid into the cursed river. Mist rose around him. The western bank blurred. The eastern bank, where Vaela waited with water at her knees, seemed to come closer. Then the ferry stopped halfway. The silver bell rang beneath his feet. Once, twice. The boat turned, not toward Vaela. Note back to Lysa. It drifted sideways, against the current, toward the far northern reeds where no lawful dock stood. The pack shouted from the western bank. Lysa went utterly still. Vaela stared through the mist. Cadran gripped the ferry rail as the cursed river widened around him. The ledger at Lysa's waist snapped open again, pages facing the empty water. Silver letters formed across the mist. The king enters a crossing recorded false. The Moon Ferry did not carry Cadran Holt to Vaela. That was the first humiliation. The second was worse. It did not carry him back. The pale boat slid sideways through the cursed river, ignoring the western dock, ignoring the eastern bank, ignoring the Alpha King standing on its boards with one hand clenched around the rail. Mist rose around him in thick silver walls. The gathered pack blurred behind him. Vaela became a dark shape beyond the reeds, still standing in rising water, still watching. Then the ferry turned toward the northern shore. No lawful dock waited there. Only black reeds, half-drowned stones, and the old wolf markers used to warn children away from water that remembered too many bodies. Cadran lifted his hand. Return. The ferry did not obey. The word crossed the river and came back empty. On the western bank, no one moved. They had seen Cadran command war lines, blood trials, border hunts, and pack courts. His voice had broken sieges. His wolf had silenced rival alphas without baring teeth. The Moon Ferry kept drifting. Vaela saw his hand lower. She did not feel satisfaction. That would have been cleaner. Instead, she felt the bitter shape of recognition. Abandonment was a different creature when viewed from the shore. It looked less lawful from a distance, less ceremonial, more like a person alone with water beginning to choose. Lysa Thorn stepped toward the dock, face pale beneath her crossing hood. Majesty, remain still. The ferry is correcting imbalance. Vaela looked at her across the water. No, it is repeating one. The silver ledger snapped open again at Lysa's waist. This time, Lysa did not try to close it. The pages faced the northern reeds. Silver ink formed slowly, each letter pulling itself out of the river mist. False patrol route reopened. Cadran looked downriver. The northern shore came closer. He had hunted near that bend as a boy. No one crossed there. The water was shallow for 3 steps, then dropped without warning into a black channel called Widow's Throat. Patrol maps marked it forbidden. Ferry law marked it unclaimed. Lysa's official routes never included it. His ferry stopped beside it. The boat struck submerged stone with a soft sound. Cadran remained standing, but the impact forced him to grip the rail. For the first time that night, the Alpha King looked less like judgment and more like a man who had been brought somewhere without being asked. The ferry's silver rope uncoiled. It tied itself to a dead root. Then the boat lowered its plank. The western bank went utterly still. Lysa's voice sharpened. Do not step off. Cadran looked toward her through the fog. Why? The question sliced through her too quickly. Vaela heard it. So did the ledger. Silver words burned below the first line. Enemy scouts landed here under royal patrol mark. The pack turned toward Lysa. She raised her chin. Enemy scouts can forge marks. Vaela's voice came cold and clear. Not ferry marks. Lysa's eyes cut to her. You were stripped of crossing, right. Do not teach law from mud. Vaela looked down at the water climbing past her knees, then back at the ferrymaster. I learned law from the people your gates left in it. The Moon Ferry bell rang once beneath Cadran's feet. The plank stayed lowered, waiting, not inviting, witnessing. Cadran looked at the northern reeds. His wolf stirred under his skin, uneasy now. Not afraid of battle, afraid of wrongness. The place smelled of old passage, but not lawful passage. Wet iron, enemy oil, Black River coin. Beneath it, faintly, the sour trace of ferry ink burned under false command. He stepped off. The moment his boot touched the forbidden shore, the ferry plank lifted. Cadran! One guard shouted. The ferry untied itself. Cadran turned. Too late. The Moon Ferry drifted away from him, not toward the western dock, toward Vaela's shore. The cursed river widened between him and the boat as if the current had been waiting all night to show him what abandonment felt like when no command could shorten the distance. On the eastern bank, Vaela stood motionless as the ferry slid toward her through the mist. The water around her knees stopped rising. Only then, not before, Cadran saw it. The entire pack saw it. The ferry had left him on a shore no lawful passage claimed, and returned to the woman he had sentenced to be left behind. Lysa whispered, Impossible. Vaela answered without looking away from the approaching boat. No. Recorded. The Moon Ferry reached the eastern mudbank and stopped at Vaela's feet. Its pale boards glowed softly. The old knot beneath the left oarlock warmed with silver light. Vaela did not step on. Not yet. That restraint struck Cadran harder than if she had seized victory. She could have boarded, crossed, and left him where he stood. She could have made the whole bank watch him taste the law he had used on her. Instead, she looked across the water at him. Not kindly, not cruelly, clearly. This is not pardon, she said. This is witness. The ledger at Lysa's waist trembled. The silver pages turned again, this time toward both wrong shores. Vaela's eastern bank and Cadran's forbidden northern landing. Ink spread across them in two columns. Left without lantern. Vaela Voss. Landed without lawful dock. Cadran Holt. The words burned brighter. Then a third line appeared between them. One sentence, two shores. The pack did not murmur now. It remembered. Every wolf at Silver Reed Crossing saw the shape of the reversal. Vaela had been abandoned by order. Cadran had been abandoned by record. The ferry did not mock him. It did not choose her. It showed the law what it looked like when stripped of ceremony. Lysa's face hardened. A river trick. The accused has stirred sympathy from the ferry. Vaela finally stepped onto the Moon Ferry. The boat did not move. She placed one hand on the oarlock. If sympathy could move this ferry, half the people you denied would still be alive. That sentence reached places the ledger had not touched yet. A woman near the western bank began to cry silently. A guard turned his face away. The old soldier with the cane lowered himself to one knee. Not to Vaela, but under the weight of memory. Cadran stood on the forbidden northern shore, mist curling around his boots. He could see the western bank. He could see Vaela. He could see Lysa standing beside the ledger that had begun to betray her page by page. For the first time since the trial began, he did not ask Vaela why she had crossed. He asked the river. What was sold here? The Moon Ferry bell answered. The ledger shook violently, chain cutting against Lysa's waist. Silver ink formed across the open pages. Safe landing sold under Ferry-Master key. Then the water beneath Cadran's feet began to rise. The northern reeds moved first. They bent toward Cadran Holt, as if the river had breathed through them, silver-black water curling around his boots, then his ankles, then the edge of the forbidden stones beneath him. The wrong shore did not roar. It did not need to. It rose with the quiet patience of something that had swallowed many names before his. Across the river, Vaela stood on the Moon Ferry, not rowing, not rescuing, waiting. That restraint unsettled the western bank more than panic would have. If she had rushed to save him, they could have called her soft. If she had laughed, they could have called her cruel. Instead, she stood with one hand on the warmed oarlock, watching the Alpha King learn the distance he had ordered around her. Cadran looked from the rising water to the ferry. Vaela. Her name carried strangely over the cursed river. Not command. Not yet a plea. Something forced between them by water and witness. She did not answer quickly. The pack waited for her to soften. Lysa waited for her to overreach. The river waited for everyone. Vaela said, "Do not use my name now as if it is a rope." Cadran's jaw tightened. He accepted the blow because there was no way to deny it. The ledger at Lysa's waist shook again. Silver pages spread toward the forbidden shore. Black river water crawled along the lower margin but did not cover the newest line. It held there, trembling, as if the record had struck a locked door. Lysa lifted her chin. A sold landing does not identify a seller. Vaela turned her head slightly. It identifies a key. A key can be stolen. Then let the ferry show the hand that used it. Lysa's eyes flashed. You are asking the cursed river to judge office law. No, Vaela said. I am asking office law to survive the river. The Moon Ferry bell rang once. The old oarlock beneath Vaela's hand brightened. The ferry shifted, not toward Cadran, not toward the western dock, but slightly sideways, aligning itself with the northern landing like a witness pointing at a wound. Cadran looked down. Water had reached his calves. His wolf moved under his skin, not afraid of drowning, but enraged by being held where command had no purchase. He could shift, he could leap, he could claw his way through reeds and current. But every instinct told him the wrong shore was not ordinary ground. If he fought it as a battlefield, the river would answer as curse. Vaela saw him measure escape. Do not fight the shore, she said. He looked across the water at her. She added, it keeps what arrives falsely until the record is named. Lysa laughed sharply. Now she instructs the Alpha King how to stand. Vaela did not look at her. Someone should have instructed him before he left me there. The words landed without ornament. Cadran felt them. So did the pack. He turned toward Lysa. What toll was paid for this landing? Her composure thinned. None. The ledger jerked open wider. Silver ink spread across the page, then shaped an image above it. 3 Black River coins laid on the northern root stone. A gloved hand placed them one by one. Not a desperate hand, not a shaking hand. A practiced one, the kind that knew where to stand so the reeds hid the exchange from the western guard tower. The image widened. Blue-gray cloth entered the mist. Lysa spoke before the face could form. Many crossing workers wear blue-gray. Vaela's voice was cold. Only one held Ferry-Master authority. The image shifted to the key. Not copied. Not stolen. Hanging against a woman's throat while the hand turned it in the air. The black coin sank into the root stone and vanished. The northern landing glowed silver for a heartbeat, lawful enough to fool the Moon Ferry, false enough to poison the ledger. The pack began to understand, not fully, but enough to fear the shape of it. Enemy passage had not slipped through Vaela's mercy crossings. It had walked through a paid door wearing official law. Cadran's eyes went flat. Who crossed? Lysa's face hardened. Missed memories cannot name enemy scouts. Vaela looked at the ledger. No, but safe landing records do. The river around Cadran rose above his knees. For the first time, his breath changed. Not panic. Pain. The curse had begun to press old cold into bone. Vaela's fingers tightened on the oarlock. She hated that she noticed. She hated more that part of her remembered everybody she had ferried through cold, even this one standing across the water wearing the shape of her sentence. Cadran saw her hand move. No, he said. The word surprised her. He swallowed the next breath, water pulling at his legs. Do not row because I am cold. Vaela looked at him. For the first time that night, he had said something almost right. Not enough. But almost. Then why should I row? He looked toward the western bank, then the ledger, then back to her. His voice carried lower. Because the record is not finished, and I am standing in the place Lysa sold. Vaela held his gaze. And if I bring you back before it names the buyers? His jaw worked once. Then I leave the wrong shore cleaner than I left you. That answer quieted something at the riverbank. Not forgiveness. Never that quickly. But the ferry listened. The oarlock warmed under Vaela's palm. Lysa stepped forward. Majesty, you cannot submit royal passage to the woman you sentenced. Cadran looked at her through the mist. I already submitted it to your ledger. That was the error. Lysa's mouth closed. The Moon Ferry drifted a handspan forward, waiting for Vaela. She did not take the oar. Not yet. Names first, she said. Lysa snapped. She bargains while the river rises around her king. Vaela turned toward the western bank, eyes hard. No. I refuse to row another truthless crossing. The ledger trembled violently. Black water poured down its pages and struck the dock in thin streams. Beneath the silver cover, something clicked open. A hidden pocket in the back binding split apart, releasing a strip of soaked parchment stamped with ferry toll marks. The parchment floated above the book. 3 enemy names blurred under river mold. But one line remained clear. Toll received by Lysa Thorn, Ferry-Master of Silver Reed. The pack went silent. Lysa's face went colorless. Cadran stood in cursed water to his thighs, staring at the name. Lysera, Vaela said softly, the full office name, the true ledger name. The Moon Ferry bell rang once, deeper than before. Then the parchment turned, revealing the next line. Safe landing purchased for wolves of... The parchment did not finish politely. It tore itself wider in the air, river water dripping from its edges, while the cursed current climbed around Cadran Holt's legs on the forbidden northern shore. The toll marks glowed one by one: black coins, false patrol seal, Ferry-Master key, hidden landing. Then the final words burned clear enough for even the farthest wolf on the western bank to read. Wolf is of discreet. The name moved through Silver Reed Crossing like a blade drawn under cloth. Duskreed wolves were not strangers. That made the reveal worse. They were not distant monsters from a nameless enemy border. They were the river raiders who had attacked Holt grain barges, poisoned reed wells, and vanished through fog before patrols could catch scent. 3 times, Cadran's scouts had found tracks ending at water. 3 times, Lysa's ledger had shown no unlawful crossing. Now, the river itself had shown why. Cadran stood in rising water, his face carved still by cold and fury. You sold them landing. Lysa's mouth opened. No answer came. Vaela heard the silence and did not mistake it for confession. Lysa Thorn was not finished. Women who built authority from ledgers knew how to survive a half-exposed page. At last, Lysa straightened. Duskreed raiders could have forged names onto old toll skin. The parchment named your office, Vaela said. My office receives hundreds of tolls. Not Black River coin under sealed landing. Lysa turned toward the pack, voice sharpening with fear disguised as warning. Listen carefully. Even if enemy wolves used a hidden landing, that does not absolve Vaela Voss. Her secret moonless crossings gave them cover. Her mercy trips blurred the river record. Without her unlawful movement, no one would have believed enemy passage was rescue. Vaela's hand tightened around the oarlock. There it was, the true shape of the accusation. Not that Vaela had sold the crossing, that she had made mercy possible without permission, and therefore made the official lie easier to hide. The old soldier with the cane lifted his head. She ferried me when the fever took my leg. Lysa snapped toward him. And because she did it outside ledger, enemy wolves crossed under the same fog. A mother near the reeds whispered, She carried my son. Then she made your son's blanket look like a raider's cloak, Lysa said. The mother flinched. Vaela looked at Lysa across the river. No, you made raiders look like patrol. The Moon Ferry bell rang once. The ledger pages turned again, violently this time, fighting their own binding. The toll parchment folded inward and sank back into the book. In its place, silver ink formed 2 columns. On the left, mercy crossings. On the right, false patrols. Vaela's 3 moonless crossings appeared first, each marked with river witness signs: fever blanket, healer bell, blood cloth. Beside them, the enemy passages appeared under royal patrol symbols, each marked with black coin and Ferry-Master key. The difference was visible, painfully visible. Mercy had left witness. Lysa had erased it. Enemy passage had left price. Lysa had disguised it. Cadran stared at the columns from the wrong shore, water now above his thighs. His wolf moved beneath his skin, but he did not shift. He seemed to understand that if he fought the shore with strength, the river would keep him as another false crossing. What did she carry on the 3rd moonless night? He asked. Vaela's face hardened. Lysa answered too fast. Enemy scouts. The ferry bell did not ring. That absence was answer enough. Cadran looked at Vaela. What did you carry? She did not want to say it. Not because it would condemn her, because it would expose someone who had already survived more than the court deserved to know, the ledger turned toward her shore. It did not write yet. Waiting. Vaela looked at the western bank, at the mother who had spoken, at the old soldier, at guards who had remembered too late. If I name them, they are not to be punished for needing passage. Cadran's mouth tightened. I cannot promise without hearing. Then you are still asking me to row your courage for you. The river pulled at him. He closed his eyes once. When he opened them, his voice had changed. Not softened. Grounded. No one named by witness record will be punished for receiving rescue crossing tonight. Lysa turned sharply. Cadran's gaze cut to her. You will not speak over that order. The command struck clean. Still, Vaela did not thank him. She looked down at the ferry boards. The third night was not enemy passage. It was 3 people. 1 fevered guard. 1 child with river salt in her lungs. 1 woman bleeding from a patrol wound. The ledger wrote each category, not names. Fevered guard. River salt child. Wounded woman. Then the ferry bell sounded under Vaela's feet, and the old oarlock warmed until silver light climbed her fingers. The pack stared. Lysa breathed. No. Vaela looked at her. That word sounds different when you are the one losing the crossing. Cadran's voice came from the northern shore, rough with cold. Why were they refused? The ledger answered before Lysa could. Official gate closed under Ferry-Master order. A second line followed. Healer bell muted. A third. False patrol recorded same night. The western bank broke into low, horrified sound. Not gasps. Memory. People remembering bells they had not heard. Gates they had found locked. Fog that had seemed too convenient. Lysa stepped back. The ledger chain pulled tight around her waist as if the book had become heavier. Cadran looked at Vaela. Water had reached his hips now, black and silver around the forbidden stones. If the ferry has enough record, will it leave this shore? Vaela looked at the Moon Ferry. It floated steady beneath her hand, no longer straining, not eager, not forgiving, waiting for lawful instruction. It will leave when the false crossing is named and the safe landing is revoked. Then revoke it. I cannot. Cadran's eyes narrowed against the cold. Why? Vaela's gaze moved to Lysa's iron key. Only the ferrymaster can revoke a landing sold under ferrymaster authority. Lysa's face went white. For the first time, the pack understood why she had fought so hard to keep the record half open. Cadran turned toward her from the wrong shore. Revoke it. Lysa's voice shook only once. If I revoke the landing, the ledger will name every passage tied to it. Vaela said quietly, Yes. The Moon Ferry bell rang again. The river surged around Cadran's waist, and the silver ledger opened to a blank page headed, All crossings sold through Northern Landing. The blank page did not remain blank for long. Silver ink gathered beneath the heading, thin as moonlight at first, then darker, heavier, as if every false crossing had left weight behind. The ledger at Lysa Thorn's waist shook so hard the chain cut through the blue-gray cloth of her ferry-master cloak. Black river water dripped from the book onto the western dock, each drop hissing against the wood. Across the river, Cadran stood in cursed water to his waist. Across from him, Vaela stood on the Moon Ferry, one hand on the glowing oarlock, the ferry board steady beneath her feet. Between them, the river opened its memory. All crossings sold through Northern Landing. The first line appeared below it. Duskreed Scouts. 3 black coins. Recorded as Royal Patrol. Then another. Duskreed Messenger. 1 bone token. Recorded as Flood Inspection. Then another. Duskreed Knife Bearer. 2 black coins. Recorded as Border Relief. A low growl moved through the gathered wolves. This time, Cadran did not silence it. His own wolf answered beneath his skin, deep and violent. But he held still because the wrong shore had taught him something strength could not solve. The water around him climbed another inch. If he shifted now, the curse would take that as force against record. If he commanded now, the river would answer with distance. He looked at Lysa, revoked the landing. Lysa's face had gone smooth again. Too smooth. No, the words struck the bank like a stone. The royal guards reached for their weapons. Cadran's voice cut through the motion. Do not draw steel at the river. Vaela's eyes flicked to him. He had learned one rule, at least. Lysa lifted the iron key at her throat. If I revoke that landing, every sealed crossing tied to it opens. Every guard who failed, every mother who begged, every body carried outside law, every weakness in your kingdom becomes public record. Her gaze moved over the crowd. Is that what you want, Majesty? A pack that sees how often its gates failed? Vaela answered before Cadran could. The gates failed whether they see it or not. Lysa turned toward her. And you think names will heal that? No, Vaela said. But hidden names keep the wound useful. The ferry bell rang once under her feet. The ledger pages turned. Not to Lysa, not to Cadran, to Vaela. A new heading formed above the sold crossings. Mercy passages refused by official gate. Vaela's fingers tightened on the oarlock. No, the word was quiet. Cadran looked across the water. Vaela? She did not look at him. It will name them. The bank stilled. Even Lysa stopped breathing for a heartbeat. Vaela stared at the ledger as if she could hold it shut with will alone. The ferry records what the ledger refused, but those people did not consent to become proof before a court that abandoned them. The Moon Ferry rocked beneath her, not in anger, in recognition. Cadran looked at the western bank, at the captain, at the old soldier, at the mother who had whispered for her son, at the guards who had stood too quiet during Vaela's sentence. Then he looked at Vaela. What does fairy law require? She gave a faint, bitter breath. Now you ask. Yes. No defense. No pride. Only the word. Vaela let the silence punish him for a moment longer. Then she said, a rescue crossing can be named in 3 ways. By the rescued if they stand willing, by a healer if the rescued cannot speak, or by the crown if the crown accepts fault for denied passage before the name is read. Lysa snapped, that is old reed law. It has not governed royal crossings in years. Vaela turned toward her. Because you stopped teaching it, the ledger answered. Old reed law remains binding, where cursed river holds life. Cadran's gaze sharpened. There it was. Not pardon. Authority. Not romance. Law. Vaela had not been ferrying outside crossing law. Lysa had narrowed the ledger until mercy looked unlawful. The old law gave a mercy rower authority when official gates refused life. Cadran looked at the gathered pack. Derek Holt guard. The captain stepped forward, face pale. Majesty? Send for him, but until he stands, I accept crown fault for his denied passage. Cadran's voice carried across both banks. Derek Holtgard was carried under fever blanket as rescue crossing, not enemy passage. The ledger wrote, Derek Holtgard, rescue crossing, crown fault accepted. The old soldier with the cane pushed himself upright. His voice trembled, but it did not break. Bryn Oral, I was carried after the flood fever took my leg. I asked Vaela to hide me because I feared losing my guard pension. Vaela closed her eyes once. The ledger wrote, Bryn Oral, rescue crossing, spoken, willing. The mother near the reeds stepped forward next, clutching her shawl so tightly her fingers shook. My daughter, Isla Marrow, river, salt in her lungs. I begged the gate. The healer bell rang. No one opened. Her gaze found Vaela across the river, and shame broke her voice. She lived because Vaela rowed. The ledger wrote, Isla Marrow, rescue crossing. Spoken by mother. One by one, the hidden mercy crossings separated from the false patrols. Not all, only those tied to the record now open. Enough. Enough for the pack to see the difference Lysa had tried to bury. Vaela's crossings had carried fever, blood, and breath. Lysa's had carried coin. The river around Cadran stopped climbing. Lysa saw it and lunged. Not at Vaela. At the key. She tore the chain from her throat and hurled the iron key toward the cursed river. For one breath, the entire crossing watched it spin through mist. If the key sank, the northern landing would remain sealed until the river chose another age to open it. Cadran would remain on false ground. The sold crossings would stay half-named. Lysa might still claim disorder, contamination, panic. The key struck the water. It did not sink. The Moon Ferry moved. Vaela did not row. The boat surged forward beneath her feet, not carrying her to Cadran, not carrying her to shore, but cutting across the current to intercept the key before the cursed river swallowed it. Vaela dropped to one knee and caught the iron chain as it slid past the ferry's prow. The key burned cold in her palm. The ledger wrote, Ferry-Master key abandoned by holder. Lysa stumbled back. Vaela rose slowly. The river wind pulled at her braid. Mist shone along her face. She looked no more crowned than she had before, no less wounded, no less alone. But the ferry beneath her had accepted what Office had thrown away. Cadran stared at the key in her hand. What does that mean? He asked. Vaela looked down at the iron teeth burning against her skin. It means the Office dropped its duty before witness. The ledger wrote the rest. Mercy rower may revoke false landing under old Reed law. Lysa's voice cracked. No. Vaela looked at her. That word keeps returning to you. Then she turned the key in the air. Note in the lock. In witness, the northern reeds screamed. The false landing beneath Cadran's feet broke apart in silver light. Black coins rose from the mud like dead beetles and dissolved. The water around him fell back from his waist to his knees. The Moon Ferry turned toward him at last. Vaela stood at its center, iron key in hand, face unreadable. Cadran looked at her across the narrowing mist. She said, I will bring you off the wrong shore when you name in public who had authority over Mercy Passage. His throat worked once. Behind him, the broken landing hissed. Before he could answer, the ledger burned a final line across the open page. Crossing right never lawfully revoked. The line in the ledger burned brighter than every lantern on Silver Reed Crossing. Crossing right never lawfully revoked. No one moved. Not Lysa Thorn, standing pale beside the western dock with a broken chain still hanging from her throat. Not the guards who had dragged Vaela to sentence, but now looked at the mud as if it might remember their hands. Not the mothers, soldiers, and river watchers, whose silence had helped dress abandonment as law. Even Cadran Holt stood still on the broken northern landing, water receding around his knees while the false shore hissed behind him. The Moon Ferry waited between him and Vaela. Vaela held the Ferry-Master key in one hand. The iron teeth had stopped burning cold, but a white mark remained across her palm where old Reed law had accepted duty no office wanted to carry. She looked down at the ledger, then across the river to Cadran. You wanted the ferry to judge me, she said. Her voice did not shake. It did, Cadran answered. No. Her eyes lifted to his. It witnessed you. The words crossed the river cleanly. He accepted them. That mattered less than it should have, and more than Vaela wanted it to. Behind him, the northern reeds began to sink. The false safe landing was losing its borrowed law, collapsing back into cursed mud now that the key had been turned in witness. If he remained there too long, even an alpha king would become part of the record instead of a man standing inside it. The Moon Ferry drifted closer to him. Vaela did not row. The boat stopped just out of reach. Cadran looked at her, not at Lysa, not at his guards, not at the pack waiting for him to command his way out of consequence. "What must be named?" he asked. Vaela's hand closed over the key. Not what. Who? His jaw tightened. She held his gaze. Name who had authority over Mercy Passage when official gates denied life. The pack seemed to lean toward the answer. Lysa found her voice first. Majesty, do not degrade the crown before the river. If you give a hidden rower authority equal to crossing office, every border law. Enough. Cadran did not shout. The word struck harder because of that. Lysa stopped. The ledger opened wider against her waist, though the key was no longer hers. The pages had begun facing Vaela now, not because they chose her as queen or mate or miracle, but because office had dropped what Mercy had carried. Cadran turned toward the western bank. Vaela Voss held Mercy Passage authority under old Reed law, he said, voice carrying over river and mist. When official gates denied healer bells, flood wounds, fever calls, and life in immediate danger, her crossings were rescue crossings, not traitor crossings. The ledger wrote each word. Silver fire followed his voice line by line. Vaela did not look relieved. Relief was too small for what had been taken, Cadran continued, and now the words cost him more. Her crossing, right, was revoked under false record. The sentence I gave was unlawful. The river went quiet. Not calm. Listening. Cadran looked at Vaela across the water. I believed a clean ledger over a living witness. Lysa whispered, Majesty. He did not turn. And I left the woman who had been keeping my people alive on the wrong shore. Vaela's throat moved once. She hated that part of her felt the weight of that sentence. It was not forgiveness. It was the first accurate thing he had placed between them. The Moon Ferry bell rang softly. The boat moved. This time, Vaela rowed. One slow pull, then another. The ferry crossed to the northern landing, pale boards sliding over dark water while the false shore broke apart behind Cadran's boots. When the boat reached him, Vaela did not offer her hand. She lowered the plank. Cadran looked at it, then at Hare. May I cross? The western bank heard the question. So did Lysa. So did every wolf who had watched him sentence Vaela without asking why. Vaela stood in the center of the ferry, iron key in hand. You may step aboard as witness, not as command. Cadran stepped onto the Moon Ferry. Only then did the northern shore collapse fully behind him, sinking into black water with a low, hungry sound. The ferry turned toward the western bank. Cadran stood across from Vaela, close enough now that she could see the cold in his face, the strain at his mouth, the dark, wet line where cursed water had climbed his clothes. He looked less untouchable on the ferry, less like a judgment carved in royal stone, more like a man who had finally been brought to the place where his orders ended. I will not ask you to forgive me tonight, he said. Good, Vaela answered. His eyes held hers. I would not deserve it. No. The single word did not wound him more than the truth already had. The ferry bell rang once, approving nothing, only carrying the moment into record. When the Moon Ferry reached the western dock, no guard moved to touch Vaela. That was the first repair. Small, necessary. She stepped onto the bank before Cadran. The ledger turned after her. Lysa stepped back, but the silver chain at her waist tightened, holding her in place. The pages opened to the toll parchment, the black coin records, the false patrol routes, the muted healer bells, the sold safe landing, and the unlawful revocation. Cadran looked at his guards. Take Ferry-Master Lysa Thorn into custody. No river cell, no private chamber. She will be held before the crossing council, the healers, the guard captain, and every rescued witness willing to stand. Lysa's composure cracked at last. I kept the crossing from becoming a beggar road. Vaela looked at her. No. You sold the road and called the wounded dangerous. The ledger wrote, Ferry-Master authority forfeited by false landing sale. The iron key in Vaela's hand warmed. She looked down at it, then at the dock marker where the Ferry-Master's office seal hung empty. Cadran saw the question before the court did. No one will force that office on you, he said. Vaela's mouth hardened slightly. You are learning where not to command. Yes. The answer was quiet. The Moon Ferry drifted behind her, its pale boards reflecting the thinning mist. The cursed river had begun to lower along the eastern bank, leaving behind black mud, bent reeds, and the marks where Vaela had stood alone without a lantern. Cadran looked toward that shore, then back to the people. Every mercy crossing named tonight is protected from punishment, he said. Every healer bell denied under Lysa Thorn's authority will be reopened before council. Every patrol mark tied to black coin will be investigated. And until crossing law is restored, Vaela Voss's rescue authority stands above any guard gate that denies life. The bank listened. This time, not because he was Alpha King, because the ferry had made command answer to witness. Vaela turned to him. Do not make me your symbol. I will not. Do not make mercy another crown tool. I will not. Her eyes narrowed. You said that too quickly. Cadran lowered his head slightly. Not a bow. Not yet. Something rougher. Then I will prove it slowly. That was better. Not enough, but better. The old soldier with the cane stepped forward first. He did not kneel. Vaela would have hated that. He simply placed one hand over his heart. Vaela Voss rode me when law shut its eyes, he said. The mother followed. Vaela Voss rode my daughter when the healer bell was muted. One by one, the names began. Not all, only those willing. That was how old Reed law required it. Vaela stood beside the Moon Ferry as the people she had saved finally gave their survival back to the record. She did not smile, she did not weep, but the white mark across her palm stopped burning. At dawn, the mist thinned over Silver Reed Crossing. The Moon Ferry rested at the dock nearest Vaela. Silver rope coiled loosely beside her boots. Cadran stood a few paces away, giving her distance he should have given before judgment. Vaela, he said. She looked at him. When the crossing council meets, will you stand as witness? She watched the river for a long moment. Then she said, I will stand for the people who were left at closed gates. And for me? Her gaze returned to him, steady and unreadable. You are not the wounded one in this story, Majesty. He took the sentence without flinching. Behind them, the Moon Ferry bell rang once in the new light. Not for departure, not for pardon, for the record that had finally learned her name,